Was last night's blowout victory in Game 5 of the NLCS just one last hurrah for the 2024 Mets, or was it the beginning of a historic comeback?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Talked about it on yesterday's show. I hoped that the season was going to continue, that I would give you more than just 160 consecutive days of Locked On Mets. And we're going to get that. We're going to get at least 161 on Sunday and 162 on Monday. And actually, that will mean that the streak will continue, as even in the offseason, we'll be doing 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. So I'm very happy that this show goes on in a certain respect. The 2024 Mets season continues. And now that I've had some time to reflect, I'm recording this well past midnight, and I enjoyed the game. I took a couple hours, hung out with my wife to close out the night there, and then got right back in my office, watched all the different players, who talked to the media, watched Dave Roberts, watched Carlos Mendoza, went through social media, pulled all the stats that I could as I prepared for this show. And the more and more I think about this game, I just think about what was a historic performance by the New York Mets. Back against the wall, they just fought, and every single guy gave it their all, every single at bat, and they didn't take anything for granted. They tacked on, they pieced it together with their pitching staff, and it was a game that I don't think Mets fans are ever really going to forget. Now, that becomes even more so if the Mets can go on to do something really special here and win this series and make this a World Series run, but you just have to tip your hat to this team for not going out with a whimper. And I said that on the live stream after the game. And again, you guys can find that on the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, where it was my gut reaction right after the final out. It was just the fight that this team showed that was so remarkable. And I didn't even have all the stats pulled at the time. I think on the live stream, I said the Mets didn't strike out to the first 7 innings. They didn't strike out the whole game. And I couldn't remember off the top of my head if there was a strikeout in the 8th or the 9th, so I didn't just come out and say it during the live stream, but now everyone's talking about it. That's remarkable. That's remarkable. Now, I will sort of note that part of that is the fact that the Dodgers basically, after Flaherty gave up the 8 runs, just put Brent Honeywell out there and let him go. They didn't try to pitch any of their high leverage guys, and we're going to talk about that a lot in the final segment today, because pitching is going to be very important to close things out, and Dave Roberts obviously saved a lot of his chips there for the final 2 games of this series. I wouldn't say he punted this one, but he really did sort of, hold things back and just let this game play out. If his offense got them back in it, obviously they would have used some of those high leverage guys, and maybe there would have been some strikeouts, but you can't take that away from the Mets. For them to go through an entire game without striking out, just the 11th time in postseason history where a team has done that. And we got a lot of stats to talk about when it comes to history, Mets history and otherwise. And I want to give a shout out to Mike Mayer, who is great at pulling these stats. He runs Mets Sprites. You can find him on Twitter at Mike Mayer22. I used to work with Mike back in the day, and he really does have one of the best accounts you can follow for your Mets stats on Twitter. So here, everything I'm about to tell you comes directly from his timeline. The Mets offense set 4 single-game postseason records in their 12-6 Game 5 win. 3 hit-by pitches, 8 extra base hits, 0 strikeouts, 2 triples. Pretty amazing. It's only the second time in Mets history, Mike notes, regular season and postseason, that they have gone through a game without striking out, and they have scored at least 12 runs. The other time was 1964, 60 years ago. Ryan Stanek, first time in his career that he got 7 outs in a game. Jeff McNeil became the first player in Mets history to get 2 sac flies in one postseason game. Starling Marte, the only Met to ever have 3 doubles in one postseason game. Jesse Winker, first Met to have multiple triples in one postseason run. And Pete Alonso moved to second on the all-time list next to Mike Piazza for the most home runs in postseason history for the Mets. On the live stream, I believe I said that was for this postseason, one postseason run. That's just all time. So Piazza did that across 99 and 2000. Alonso has hit 4 during this run, hit 1 back in 2022, I believe in the Game 2 victory against the Padres. The guy that is the all-time franchise leader in home runs did it in a single postseason. That's Daniel Murphy, 7 home runs back in 2015. Now, speaking of Pete Alonso, who also, by the way, is tied with Mark Vientos for the team lead this postseason, because Vientos is 1 away from moving the second all-time. He's got 4 as well. We talk about Pete Alonso a lot on this show, and throughout this season, he has been a huge talking point because of his impending free agency. Wouldn't you know it? Pete Alonso is now 2 home runs away and 3 RBIs away from getting to the typical 40 and 100 season we see from him every year. Took a little bit of extra games this year, but Pete Alonso, it always feels like it's inevitable that he'll get to those milestones. Now, if you combine the 34 home runs he hit in the regular season, the 4 that he's hit in October, the 88 RBIs in the regular season, the 9 that he has in October, he's right there. So maybe Pete's got a little more magic left in that bat. Maybe there's another 3-run homer where he notches off the 100 RBIs, and then maybe he has a solo shot in him, or maybe a home run comes in the World Series. But Pete Alonso has really rewrote the narrative of his season this October to have the 2 biggest home runs, arguably, of this postseason run, or maybe 2 of the 3. You got to put Lindor's grand slam in there, right? So I'd say number 1 probably so far this postseason run is the 3-run homer in the wild card round, just because there was 1 out left to play with. So I'll give Pete that one. Then I maybe say Lindor to beat the Phillies. But this one to start the game, the momentum that created for the Mets, it was massive. It really was. And then you talk about the pitching, and the Mets really had to piece it together. David Peterson, to get through those first 3 innings, giving up just 1 run. He gets 11 outs of the 27. You obviously would have liked to get a little bit more, but he loads the bases in that 4th inning. You have to be cautious. So you go to Reed Garrett. Garrett gets a huge strikeout to get out of that jam. That allows the Mets to tack on 2 more runs, which were very necessary, because in the 5th inning, Garrett got the first 2 outs. Then he eventually gives up a 3-run homer. So as much as the Mets would have loved to get Garrett through the 5th, they had to go to Ryan Stanek against Shohei Ohtani. He comes in, gets the big strikeout, gives up a solo homer to Mookie Betts, but then retires the next 6. Ryan Stanek's performance was so big to get those 7 outs. And Edwin Diaz looked lights out after that to shut the door. We can talk about the lack of other options that you had to continue with Edwin Diaz in a game that you're winning 12-6. But I'm sorry, I did not fault Carlos Mendoza at all for that, because you had to make sure you got this one to move this series on. You have a day off for some of those guys to rest. But this team has a chance, and that's the incredible thing, because it felt like they were dead in the water after losing game 4. It felt like they didn't have a chance in this series. And I recorded that live stream after game 4, and it was super sad. But I allowed myself to get optimistic for the morning podcast on Friday for your pregame, where I just said, while I wasn't necessarily optimistic that the Mets would win the series, I was optimistic that they'll win game 5, and they did that. Now it gets tougher, though, because I don't want to say the Dodgers gave the Mets this one, but they certainly did hold back, knowing they have 2 more chances to clinch. So the road gets tougher for the Mets. While you can say Chaminade game 6, and then who knows what can happen in game 7, and that's absolutely true, does not mean this thing's going to be easy. But the thing we've learned about the 2024 New York Mets, they like to take the road less traveled. They like to go through the more difficult path, and that's what they set themselves up for. And it could turn into one of the more historic series in franchise history. Can this team get it done? I'm going to tell you why you don't doubt a team of destiny in the next segment. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. You watch the winnings roll in. Get on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. So you can turn $10 into $1,000. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB. You're going to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Goal is to get to 11,000 subscribers by the end of the postseason. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so let's talk about the 2024 New York Mets. Remember, this is a team that was 11 games under 500 on May 29th. At the time, they were 10 games back of the Atlanta Braves. They went on, as we all know, after the players-only meeting, to be the best team in baseball in June and July. They were just outstanding, but they struggled coming out of the trade deadline. They had a rough patch. They had that West Coast trip, 10 days, 4 different cities, really tough. They got swept by the Mariners. They came home. They lost the series to the A's. Now, as I've said, I think that journey, those 10 days, were vital to the Mets at the end of the season on difficult travel, which they had to really get used to. And it taught them how to rise above that, right? With that said, because of some of the struggles early in August, you get to August 28th. The Mets are in the middle of their series against the Arizona Diamondbacks, one that is vital. They win the first game of that series. They are up in the second game. They're winning 5-4, bottom of the 8th inning. They go to Edwin Diaz to try to get out of a jam, and he gives up a grand slam to Corbin Carroll. The Mets lose that game by a score of 8-5. After that loss, this is August 28th, the New York Mets were 4 games back of the Braves, 7 games back of the Arizona Diamondbacks, with about a month left to play. This team never quit then, and they won't quit now. The next day, David Peterson gives them 7 strong innings, allows just 2 runs. Pete Alonso hits a homer early. Francisco Lindor hits a homer in the middle of the game to tie it at 2 runs apiece. Jose Iglesias gets an RBI hit in the 9th inning, and that was off of Justin Martinez, one of the toughest closers in the game. Another theme of this season. Edwin Diaz came back out, got the save in the 9th inning. That game is the reason the Mets are in the playoffs. Winning that game by a score of 3-2 allowed them to have the tiebreaker that put them over the Diamondbacks and got them into the dance. And even further, there's a game that I remember against the Pirates that I feel like is indicative of who this team has become, and it was early in July. The Pirates held the Mets scoreless through 7 innings. It was actually scoreless across the board. 8th inning, the Mets get their first run. Brendan Nimmo hits an RBI double to drive in Francisco Lindor. The Mets take a 1-0 lead. Daniel Nunez is pitching that 8th inning. Things aren't going well. Carlos Mendoza goes to Edwin Diaz for a 4-out save. The Pirates end up getting some hits off of Diaz. It's a 2-run rally for them. They take the lead, bottom of the 8th. They turn it over to their closer, Aroldis Chapman, in the 9th inning, and Chapman is throwing fuzz. Francisco Alvarez falls behind 0-2 to lead off that inning. Fouls off a couple of tough pitches, works a great at-bat, walks on 8 pitches to start a rally. Harrison Bader gets a base hit. Then Mark Vientos, who at that point was batting 7th, looks completely overmatched, strikes out. Luis Torrens pinch hits for Jeff McNeil, so it's not a left-on-left situation. Looks overmatched, strikes out. Jose Iglesias batting in the 9 hole with 2 outs, 2 on. Mets trailing by 1. Fights in an at-bat. And I don't know if you guys remember this at-bat, but I'll never forget it, man. Aroldis Chapman is just consistently firing fastballs or sinkers on him. And Jose Iglesias is just battling tooth and nail. He has no chance to put a ball in play, honestly. But he also can keep himself in the at-bat. He fouls off 4 pitches in the at-bat. all of them at 100 miles per hour or higher. The last foul ball he hits is on a pitch that comes in at 102.5 miles per hour. Jose Iglesias hanging in there. He gets the walk on a fastball at 102, just under the zone. And I remember how fired up he was to have worked that walk and to have passed the baton to the leadoff hitter, Francisco Lindor, who on the third pitch of the at-bat rips a single, drives in two, and the New York Mets take the lead back. Edwin Diaz, after blowing it in the eighth, goes back out for the ninth, seals the deal, gets the job done. When you think about a 162-game season where the New York Mets got in via a tiebreaker, that's just 2 games out of all of those victories the Mets had, especially from the end of May on, where this team time and again answered the bell. Think about those huge home runs by Francisco Alvarez and Jesse Winker to win that series against the Orioles. Each of those games proved to be necessary, and it got the Mets into the dance, including that remarkable game against the Braves, where it was back and forth. You're trailing 3-0 through 7. You score 6. You give up 4. Lindor hits the 2-run homer. Edwin Diaz goes from blowing it to going back out there and getting the job done, just like he did against the Pirates on, I think it was July 7th. All of these things have put the Mets in this position to be this resilient team that you can believe in going up against the giant, the Goliath that is the Los Angeles Dodgers, with Shohei Ohtani and Mookie Betts and Max Muncy and Freddie Freeman and all those great relievers they have, where the Mets can get this job done. A team that was down to their final out against the Brewers, and Pete Alonso hit that big home run and they prevailed. A team that went against the best regular season Phillies team in years, the first team to win the NLCS for the Phillies since, what was it, 2008, 2009, whatever it was? Actually, maybe it was 2011. Regardless, the first team in over a decade for the Phillies to win the NLCS. The Mets knock them off in 4 games at home. Lindor at the Grand Slam. If this isn't a team of destiny, I don't know what is. And maybe their destiny does end here. Maybe it does end in LA and the better team prevails. But they have shown that they can make the impossible happen. They can go from down 3-1 in this series, losing their first 2 games at home in the NLCS by a collective score of 18-2, where it just looked like they were completely overmatched. And what do? They get off the mat, they punch back, and they don't just beat the Dodgers, they beat up the Dodgers. Now when it comes to the strategy of the series, which we're going to talk about in the next segment, it's 2 games, and the Mets might have a pitching edge in both of them. Can they pull off the impossible and advance to the World Series? They're 2 wins away. We're going to talk about it in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, your live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's $200 guaranteed. You don't have to win that first $5 bet. You just have to place one, and you get those bonus bets guaranteed. Maybe you believe the Mets are going to win this series. Throw $5 on the series right now, or maybe $5 on Game 6. You'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure to become a Locked On Mets Insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways, and you get the lineup graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go to social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets Insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, when we look at the final 2 games of this series, and I'm going to give you a full Game 6 preview on Sunday morning, so we'll key in a little bit more on that game, but I'm just more looking at if the Mets are going to make the World Series, it's 18 innings, it's 54 outs. How do they get there? And do they have the advantage or the disadvantage against the Dodgers in these games? I still think starting pitching-wise, they clearly have an edge because obviously Game 6, they have a starting pitcher. The Dodgers do not. They're going bullpen game. I think Manaea against the bullpen, as it proved to be in game 2, is a big edge to the Mets. Then you look at game 7, Buehler, Sevy. I said going into game 3 that Luis Severino would make or break the Mets and their path to the World Series. If this series gets to 7, it's all on Sevy's shoulders. So that'll be interesting to discuss if and when we get there. But looking at the Mets bullpen and how they're set up for game 6, I think it's very telling that you were winning 11-6 going into the 7th inning. Kodai Senga was warming up at one point this game, and the Mets couldn't trust him with the 5-run lead. That's telling. So because of the decisions the Mets have made, going with Kodai Senga in game 1, which at this point, who cares? But moreover, going with Kodai Senga and also going a guy short when it comes to their pitchers. The Mets should not have carried Luis Angel Acuna in this series. He's barely played. He's barely had an impact. The Mets should have Adam Ottavino on this roster because I think they would have trusted Adam Ottavino to pitch in an 11-6 game. I really do. And if that first inning went well, they might even send him out there for a second. And you might have been able to save some bullets on Ryan Stanek's arm and on Edwin Diaz's arm. Now, ultimately, you got here. You got to game 6, and that's a great thing. But it took 31 pitches from Reed Garrett, 31 pitches from Ryan Stanek, and 23 pitches from Edwin Diaz. You get a day off. That's great. Let's just say you need to use all those guys the same amount in game 6. What will you have left for game 7? That's the thing, right? And you don't want to get ahead of yourself. You got to win game 6 first. But I don't blame Carlos Mendoza for not going to Kodai Senga, but it really just shows you right now the New York Mets are pitching 2 men down because I don't think we see Senga in this series, and you don't have Ottavino. Now, you look at the Dodgers situation. Brent Honeywell does exactly what Danny Young did for the Mets in game 4, where Danny Young just wore it. Honeywell did that, but actually covered even more innings, right? He really did, where he threw 67 pitches for them. All they needed outside of Jack Flaherty and Honeywell was Anthony Banda for 2 pitches to get Jeff McNeil out. That's it. Got 1 out. So the Dodgers, they get their bullpen 2 days rest. Pretty much everybody but Honeywell and Banda threw 2 pitches. Everybody got game 5 off, and they get a day off leading into a bullpen game. Now, after game 5, Dave Roberts talked about his strategy, and he said, he has 5 leverage guys, and he had to avoid the temptation to use them because you just don't know if you really are going to get back into the game. And he knows he has a bullpen game coming up. Now, who are the 5 leverage guys? Michael Kopech, clearly. Evan Phillips, Blake Trinan. Those guys are obvious. Daniel Hudson, I imagine, is another leverage guy, and I would say maybe Ryan Brazier because they did use Banda. I think that's probably their leverage guys in the situation. If you go back to their last series, the Dodgers had to win 2 games with their backs against the wall, and they used their bullpen to do it. A bullpen game in game 4 against the Padres, and then in game 5, Yoshinobu Yamamoto and the bullpen got the job done. Now, you look at how they navigated those 2 games. Evan Phillips got 3 innings across those 2 games. Michael Kopech pitched 2. Trinan pitched 2. Brazier got 4 outs. Daniel Hudson got an inning. Alec Vesia pitched 2 innings. He got hurt. Stud lefty reliever they had that's not in this series. So that does play a little bit of a role in where the Dodgers are at right now. But a big key in their formula to beating the Padres was getting 5 scoreless from Yoshinobu Yamamoto in game 5. And they pulled him when he was at 63 pitches, right? The question to me, if this series goes 7, is what will the Dodgers get out of Walker Buehler? And then where will the bullpen be at that point? If the New York Mets score 5 runs off of Ryan Brazier in the first inning and Manaea is carving, they're going to try to stay away from those leverage guys, and they will go to them very quickly in a game 7, right? If this game 6 is close, which you almost, it sets the Mets up better for game 7 if game 6 is close. But as Mets fans, we don't want to see that. We want to see the Mets blow out the Dodgers so we can all just, be able to breathe throughout that game. But all of this is to say, for the New York Mets to win this series, it's going to take a very huge effort from this pitching staff to keep the Dodgers at bay. The Dodgers only have one starting pitcher they can go to at this stage, right? They just have Buehler for Game 7. But they have a very rested bullpen. So if Game 6 is close, you're going to see all of those guys. You're going to see Brazier maybe start the game again because they continue to go to that. Or who knows? Maybe Michael Kopech is really rested, former starting pitcher. Maybe they go Kopech. Maybe Kopech goes out there and he pitches the first 2 or 3 innings. Like, I don't know how Dave Roberts is going to manage it. My assumption would be Brazier just because it allows him to continue to keep some of his cards and hold them if he needs to. But it's really going to be a game of chess here. And it's Dave Roberts, who has been in a million postseason games, versus Carlos Mendoza, a rookie manager. And are the Mets going to be able to win that chess match across these final 2 games? If Sean Manaea doesn't have it in Game 6, the Mets are cooked. I mean, if Manaea has to get pulled in the 3rd inning, what you would exhaust to get through that game with a victory is going to make it nearly impossible to win a Game 7. So first and foremost for the New York Mets to pull off this upset, they're going to need Manaea to be great. Now, Sean Manaea said that he sort of ran out of gas his last time. He put up 5 zeros, and then it started to be a struggle in that game, right? The 6th inning is where he let it up, and they had to go to the bullpen, and they got 4 outs from Maton, 4 outs from Stanek, 4 outs from Diaz, and that's how they navigated and got those final 12 outs of the game. If Sean Manaea looks great through 5, are they going to put him back out there for the 6th? I think so, but they're probably going to have a quick hook. Now, I can't see Jose Butto, Danny Young, or Tyler McGill pitching in Game 6 or Game 7, really. Like you almost look at where the Mets are at, and you probably want to avoid using all those guys unless absolutely necessary. And same goes with Kodai Senga. So realistically, what we're talking about here is, can the Mets get 18 innings out of Sean Manaea, Phil Maton, Ryan Stanek, Reed Garrett, Edwin Diaz, and Luis Severino? And then you might have Jose Quintana on 3 days rest for a Game 7. You might have David Peterson on 2 days rest for a Game 7. But that's what the Mets are up against. Trying to get 54 outs against that really tough Dodgers lineup with a pitching staff that will be pushed to the absolute brink. Nobody would have thought when the Mets signed Sean Manaea to that 1+1 deal that was the 2 for 27, Luis Severino 1 for 14. Nobody would have expected that those guys would be getting the ball for Game 6 and Game 7 of an NLCS against the Los Angeles Dodgers, who had spent $1 billion on Shohei Ohtani and Yoshinobu Yamamoto and made it like 1.2 when they added in trading for Tyler Glasnow and giving him the extension. No one would have thought that these 2 teams would have been on a collision course, and it would be Manaea and Severino that the Mets would have their hopes pinned to. That Kodai Senga would be a non-factor. But that's where we're at. And if you followed the journey of the 2024 Mets, it's probably right where they want to be. Can the Mets get this done? Absolutely they can. Do I see the path right now to say the Mets have an advantage? No, they're down 3-2 in this series. But just like I said, going into Game 5, am I optimistic that the Mets are going to win Game 6? Absolutely I am. Sean Manaea on the hill against a bullpen game, the Mets lineup clicking on all cylinders. I think they can win this Game 6. And then we will look and see what the roadmap is in Game 7 behind Luis Severino. How much do the Mets have to exhaust to get there? And can they survive this war of attrition? It's going to be fun, but we have more series left, and that is the most exciting part of this all. I appreciate all of you who continue to be along with me for this journey of a season. We'll be back with another show on Sunday morning to preview more specifically what's going to happen in Game 6. Mets versus Dodgers. Can't wait. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on social media, Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. That's subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.